Last time, I tried to explain both his debt to Neoplatonism, which provided the catalyst for his seeing the truth of Christianity, and his criticism, the shortcomings of Neoplatonism. And so today, what I want to do is to see how he put the pieces together, and how this kind of Christianized Platonism, then, looks to St. Augustine. Now, inasmuch as it is a Christianized Platonism, you would naturally expect that at the heart of it is a theory of forms. And that's certainly the case. In fact, Augustine sees the forms as both transcendent in the mind of God and immanent in the creation. And of course, it's the Neoplatonic note rather than Plato as such that makes that so possible by virtue of the Platonic conception of emanation. So that in the mind of God, the forms are thought of as eternal truths, rationes aeternae, eternal thoughts, eternal truths. Yes, they are archetypes, patterns in the mind of God. That notion was first introduced by the Neoplatonists. In Augustine's language, this is the same thing as talking of the eternal wisdom of God, the foreknowledge of God, his eternal counsels according to which he created and works in the creation. So the rationes aeternae. And in the creation itself, rationes seminales, that is to say, seminal reason, seminal thoughts, seminal truths. As it were, the seeds that give capacity for development in nature. And in his long, long work on the literal interpretation of Genesis, interesting work, he tries not only to comment on the Genesis creation account, but he weaves it together with this theory of forms, you see? So that all subsequent kinds of things in creation are in seminal form of the original act of creation, and subsequently develop. But these seminal forms, then, are the forms which give order, nature, to various species of things. So if you want to know the nature of a species, the essence of something, you have to know the forms. Well, that much we can see quite readily because it is so much in the Platonic tradition. But that immediately starts posing the epistemological questions. How can we know the forms? And of course, in the work of Plato, you get one answer, by dialectic, that enables us to recollect what's innate. But for Augustine, they're not innate within the human mind. In Aristotle, you get another answer, inasmuch as the forms are immanent within things, within particulars, by abstracting the forms in thought from our experience of whole classes of particulars. But no, that's not Augustine either. He's too Platonic for that. So the question then is still, how is this going to be? Actually, different interpreters of Augustine have come up with different theories. There is one who takes it that there is God-given innate knowledge, so that we come into this life with sort of what a friend of mine years ago called a pipeline to God, by virtue of which those ideas could be present in the mind. That doesn't seem to be the way that Augustine talks. There's another view that somehow or other the human mind is able to gain direct access into the mind of God, and know God's thoughts as they are in God's mind, by virtue of some amazing kind of illumination. But of course this would mean that the soul directly beholds the very essence of God. And Augustine certainly doesn't say that. He sees a lot of mystery concerning the nature of God. And in any case, since we're talking of a general human knowledge of forms, that would have to mean that the most pagan of unbelievers who have knowledge of forms know the essence of God. And that didn't seem right either for the Christian Augustine. So what is the account? And Stumpf presents it, although he makes it sound a little bit like Aristotle. Copleston does a good job of setting it forth. The point is not that we gain direct access to the mind of God. No, that's not it. The point is rather that God illumines the human mind, sheds light on the mind so as to enable us to see, to recognize the forms, the natures of things in the world of particulars, they being immanent there. The difference from Plato is that we do not grasp forms in their transcendent status. The difference from Aristotle is that we do not simply, by ordinary natural exercise of the human mind, abstract them from experience of particulars. It takes illumination, divine illumination, which Aristotle didn't see. So what Augustine is saying then is that all human beings have access to eternal truth concerning the nature of created things by virtue of a general kind of illumination of the human mind. And Augustine is apt to quote Bible texts to support his views, and he quotes John 1 about the Logos, the light that lighteneth everyone that comes into the world, a universal, general illumination by the divine Logos. So notice then that the Logos doctrine becomes very important at that juncture, the epistemological function of the Logos in enlightening the mind, as well as becoming important at this juncture, the Logos who orders the creation. You see, the metaphysical functioning and the epistemological functioning of the Logos, both. So then, what you have in human knowledge is, if you like, a divine human concursus. The term concursus is often used subsequently by theologians to talk about the way in which divine activity, along with human activity, these two concurring, divine activity cooperating with human activity, makes possible knowledge of the forms, a divine human concursus. What Augustine wants to say, of course, is like some of those church fathers said about the knowledge that some pagan writers had. That if they know these things, it is thanks to God, and in that sense all truth comes from God, without whom we could not know. Which strikes me as a thoroughly consistent kind of theism. If theism asserts the continued dependence of creatures on God, then that should surely include a continued epistemological dependence of creatures on God. And so Augustine is talking about that epistemological dependence, the divine human concursus, God cooperating with human activity in making knowledge possible. So on epistemology, that's the way it comes out, and you can see it in a number of his writings. In a book of his called Against the Academicians, well, let's say Against the Academics. By the academics, he refers to the skeptics of the academy. You remember that in the history of Hellenistic skepticism, there was the original Greek skepticism. Then there was a stage in Plato's academy and its subsequent history which turned skeptical. Now that's the skepticism that he's responding to in Against the Academics. People like Carneades, and so forth. And he argues against the skeptic denial that we have truth. He argues that all men possess truth. And his examples of truth we possess includes logical truths. A logical truth is one that has the logical form of the law of identity or the law of non-contradiction, A equals A is not non-A, truths of that sort. It includes the knowledge of self-existence, his famous claim that if I'm mistaken or deceived, I still must exist. See Philosophy000. Even a skeptic knows that. If he says he doesn't know, at least he must exist not to know. See Philosophy000. He talks about the role of dialectic in bringing these kinds of truth to the light of understanding. And he even develops in another of his works, let's see, on free choice of the will. In another of his works, he develops an argument for the existence of God on this basis. His argument is that truths, particular truths, are only true because they participate in truth, capital T. That is to say, they must participate in that which is the very essence and nature of truth. And by definition, the essence and nature of immutable truth, whence all other things that are true can be true, is none other than God the Logos. And so he argues from truths to truth, from logoi to logos. His argument for the existence of God. It's perhaps the first original attempt of a Christian thinker to develop a theistic argument, and is one which finds its echoes in later medieval writings. Watch for it. Then in another of his writings on the teacher, he asks how it is that we learn, and what's the function of language in this. And he comes up with a question, a form of the question, which reminds us of Gorgias, the old sophist skeptic. You remember Gorgias? Who had said, nothing exists, if anything exists I couldn't know it, and if I could know it I couldn't communicate it. Well, as Augustine poses the problem, it's this way. If you already know the meaning of my words, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. If you don't know the meaning of my words, I cannot tell you anything you don't know. So how can I teach you? Now, admittedly, there's a terribly simplistic conception of language that underlies that, and of how we learn language, and so forth. But he's posing that sort of dilemma. His point is that it's not the teacher without that teaches us, but the teacher within that teaches us, illumining the mind to the truth. And the teacher that teaches within is the Logos, enlightening the mind. It is Christ who teaches within. He is the teacher. So the way in which Augustine develops his epistemology hinges on the epistemological function of the Logos. And you cannot help but notice how he just unequivocally equates the Logos with the Christ, drawing on that prologue to John's Gospel. Any question, comment? There? It's a fascinating kind of picture to see how he brings the pieces together. Okay, what about the human soul? What about the human soul? Well, in the first place, the soul is not a material thing, as the Stoics and Tertullian had thought. It's, of course, an immaterial substance. Again, the soul is not some pre-existent eternal thing, as Plato had thought, and Origen had followed Plato. And his reason for denying that is that the soul is subject to change. It may not be a spatial thing, a material thing, but it's a temporal thing, and is subject to change. Incidentally, he explores three views about the origin of the individual soul. One is the theory of pre-existence, which he rejects, and by and large Christian thought has rejected through the centuries, few exceptions. He considers the Traducian view of the Stoics, that the soul is transmitted in physical reproduction, the Tertullian had accepted. And he considers the creational view that the individual soul is separately created by God at some point following conception. And he fails to make up his mind between the last two. So he's not sure about the origin. But he is sure that it's not pre-existent. That is to say, a human person is a rational soul using a body. And that's a phrase that he uses sometimes, a rational soul using a body. Later in his writings, he seems to think that it doesn't give the body its full place. And he tends to say a rational soul with a body. So you are soul and body, not just soul using a body. That using a body sounds too platonic. But it's the whole person that is the rational soul and body. Yet at the same time, he wants to say that the soul alone must be thought of as an immaterial substance, therefore capable of separate existence. And so the immortality of the soul is by virtue of the fact that it is an immaterial substance, part of the composite substance, which is the whole person. And as a result, he's quite happy to use some of Plato's arguments for the immortality of the soul. As, for instance, the argument that the soul, being immaterial, non-spatial, is indivisible. If it's indivisible, it's indestructible, therefore immortal. You remember that in Plato. He argues that one in his soliloquies. But he also has a dialogue on immortality, where he uses another Platonic argument that it's the soul that gives life to the body, and the life-giver, being life-giver, cannot die. Because the body depends on the soul. The soul doesn't depend on the body. And not depending on the body, the soul survives the death of the body. So his arguments for immortality essentially are Greek philosophical arguments. And similarly, his view of how the soul rules the body. Those who, like the Stoics, had a materialist view of soul would think of the soul as spatially diffused throughout the body, energizing and enlivening the senses and functions of the body. But Augustine's clear-headed enough to see that if the soul is immaterial, it cannot be spatially diffused. You see? So rather than ruling the body by diffusion, it rules it by giving attention. It exercises influence over the parts of the body by focusing attention on those parts. Now, actually, there's, I suspect, a degree of empirical evidence for that. You know, if you want to know what is it that you vaguely feel in your leg, you examine your leg, do you not? You give your mind gives attention to the leg. You don't have to look at it. You just, in your mind, just try to focus the sensations in the leg. Perhaps in addition to feeling it, looking at it. So it's by virtue of that kind of vital attention, mental attention. Remember I commented last time that one of the things that impresses him about the mind or the soul is that it's able to reach out in space and encompass things in its thought that are miles away. You know, a lot of people's minds have been in Washington and the Senate hearings for several days. Interesting. Miles away. Yet their minds have been where, as we say? Their minds have been elsewhere, and then in their own bodies, in those regards. So, immortality of the soul and the way in which it rules the body. But the most interesting thing about the human soul, that, for me at least, in Augustine, is the way in which he probes the conceptions of time and eternity. And this comes out in that segment that you have from the Confessions in the Kaufmann Anthology, beginning 510 and running on to 520. This is another case where you have what seems like a Platonic point of view that gets converted to Christianity. Time, for Plato, you remember in his Timaeus, time was spoken of as a changing image of the eternal. Because in the world of time, granted the divided line, in the world of time, what you have is changing particulars. In the realm of the eternal, what you have is unchanging forms. And of course, particulars then are changing copies of unchanging forms. Time is the changing image of the eternal. That's the Platonic way of talking about it. In contrast to Aristotle's way of saying that time is simply the measure of physical motion. So many miles per hour, a way of measuring motion, traveled, distance. Well, Augustine's own view takes off then more from Plato, and he probes our time consciousness. Time as it is in the soul. In other words, it's an exercise in introspective psychological description. Examining the psychology of time consciousness, introspectively.